The thunder cracked like a whip across the darkened Montana sky as Willow Zimmerman hammered another nail into the broken fence post, her sodden dress clinging to her shivering frame. It was 1878, and the storm that had rolled in from the mountains threatened to wash away not just her fence, but everything she had worked for since inheriting her father's struggling ranch 6 months ago. Rain pelted her face like tiny bullets, but she gritted her teeth and continued working. The last thing she needed was for her small herd of cattle to wander off during the night. Without them, there would be nothing left to sell come autumn, and the bank would surely take everything her father had built over 20 years of backbreaking work. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" A deep voice bellowed over the howling wind. Willow nearly dropped her hammer as she twisted around to see a tall figure on horseback, silhouetted against a flash of lightning. She recognized him immediately: Ethan Young, owner of the sprawling Double Y ranch that bordered her modest property to the north. She'd seen him in town occasionally, but had never exchanged more than brief pleasantries. "What does it look like I'm doing?" she shouted back, turning her attention to the fence. "I'm fixing what's broken before I lose my cattle." Ethan dismounted in one fluid motion, his long oilskin coat flapping in the wind as he trudged through the mud toward her. At 32, he was the most successful rancher in the county, and rumors of his hard-nosed business dealings preceded him wherever he went. "You're going to catch your death out here," he said, now close enough that she could make out his features' strong jaw partially hidden beneath a well-trimmed beard, eyes the color of a summer storm. "This can wait until morning." "No, it cannot," Willow insisted, driving another nail with perhaps more force than necessary. "Not all of us have hired hands to do our work for us, Mr. Young." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You're stubborn enough to scare the wind, Miss Zimmerman." Their eyes met briefly before another crack of lightning sent Willow's horse, tied to a nearby tree, rearing in panic. Before she could react, the animal broke free and bolted into the darkness, carrying her saddlebag with the remaining nails and supplies. Damnation! She cursed, forgetting herself in her frustration. Ethan didn't comment on her unladylike language. Instead, he assessed the half-repaired fence and the darkening sky. "My ranch house is closer than yours. Come with me before this storm gets any worse. We can return in the morning." "I'm not leaving this unfinished," Willow protested, though her body betrayed her with a violent shiver. Ethan stepped closer, towering over her 5'6" frame. "Your father would not want you risking your life for a fence, Miss Zimmerman." I knew Jacob well enough to say that with certainty. The mention of her father sent a pang through Willow's chest. "You didn't know him at all," she whispered, though her words were carried away by the wind. "Please," Ethan said, his voice softening. "Let me help you." Something in his tone, a genuine concern she hadn't expected from the notoriously shrewd businessman, made her hesitate. Another shiver racked her body, and Willow reluctantly acknowledged that staying out in this weather was foolish, no matter how urgently the fence needed repair. "Fine," she conceded, "but I'll be back at first light." Ethan nodded, guiding her toward his horse. With impressive strength, he lifted her into the saddle before mounting behind her. His chest pressed against her back as he reached around to take the reins, and Willow was suddenly aware of an entirely different kind of warmth despite her soaked clothing. "Hold on," he instructed, spurring the horse forward into the storm. The ride to Ethan's ranch house took less than 15 minutes, but by the time they arrived, Willow's teeth were chattering uncontrollably. The house was larger than she'd expected, a handsome 2-story structure of locally quarried stone with a wide porch and multiple chimneys. A middle-aged woman rushed forward as they entered, her eyes widening at the sight of Willow. "Mr. Young, who is this poor creature?" Mrs. Holloway, this is Miss Zimmerman from the neighboring property, Ethan explained, helping Willow dismount. She needs dry clothes and something warm to drink immediately. Of course, the housekeeper replied, already ushering Willow toward the stairs. Come, dear, let's get you out of those wet things before you catch your death. In a daze of exhaustion and cold, Willow allowed herself to be led to a guest bedroom where Mrs. Holloway provided a simple but well-made dress. It belonged to Mr. Young's sister when she visited last summer, the woman explained. She's about your size, I reckon. When Willow descended the stairs 30 minutes later, dry and warm in the borrowed dress, she found Ethan waiting in a handsomely appointed study. A fire blazed in the hearth, and the smell of coffee permeated the air. You look much improved, Ethan commented, rising from his desk. I was beginning to worry. Thank you for your hospitality, Willow said formally, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. But I don't want to impose. Once the storm passes, the storm isn't going anywhere tonight, Ethan interrupted, gesturing toward the window where rain still lashed against the glass. You'll stay here. I insist. Willow bristled at his commanding tone. Mr. Young, while I appreciate your assistance this evening, I am perfectly capable of making my own decisions. A smile tugged at his lips. I'm well aware of your capabilities, Miss Zimmerman. I've heard tell of how you've been running that ranch single-handedly since your father's passing. It's admirable. His unexpected praise caught her off guard. You've been asking about me. This is a small community. People talk. He settled into a chair by the fire and motioned for her to take the one opposite. Especially about a young woman of 23 trying to manage a cattle ranch on her own. Willow sat down stiffly. And what exactly do they say? That you're either the most determined woman west of the Mississippi or the most foolhardy. His eyes crinkled at the corners. I'm beginning to think it might be both. Despite herself, Willow felt a smile forming. My father taught me everything he knew about ranching. I may not have a man's strength, but I have his knowledge. Knowledge will only get you so far when winter comes, Ethan said, his expression growing serious. Jacob was a good man, but that land has never been particularly productive. It's productive enough, Willow countered defensively. We may not have the vast acreage of the Double Y, but what we have is ours, or mine now. Ethan studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. Have you considered selling? Willow's spine stiffened. So that was his game. Is that why you helped me tonight, Mr. Young? To soften me up for a business proposition? No, he answered simply, surprising her again. I helped you because leaving anyone out in that storm would be unconscionable. The business can wait for another day. Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway, announcing that dinner was served. Ethan led Willow to a dining room where a meal that would have fed her for 3 days was laid out on a polished oak table. As they ate, Willow found herself drawn into conversation with her enigmatic host. Despite his reputation, Ethan proved to be thoughtful and well-read, discussing everything from cattle breeding to the latest novel by Mark Twain. How did you end up with the Double Y? Willow asked as they finished their meal. I know you weren't born here. Ethan's expression grew distant. I came west after the war, needed a fresh start after Gettysburg. He didn't elaborate, but the shadow that crossed his face told Willow enough. I worked as a ranch hand for 5 years, saved every penny, then bought a small plot when old man Peterson wanted to move back east. Built it up from there. That's impressive, Willow said sincerely. Not as impressive as holding on to your father's legacy despite the odds, he replied. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a mutual recognition of the other's determination. The moment was broken when Mrs. Holloway entered with dessert, and conversation turned to lighter topics. By the time Willow retired to her guest room, the storm outside had become a distant rumble, and her perception of Ethan Young had shifted considerably. Morning came with clear skies and birdsong. Willow woke early, determined to return to her property and finish repairing the fence. She found Ethan already in the kitchen, discussing the day's work with a foreman. "Ah, Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her. "I was just arranging for some of my men to help with your fence." "That won't be necessary," Willow said quickly. "I can manage." The foreman, a weathered man named Davis, looked between them with poorly concealed amusement before excusing himself. "You don't have to prove anything to me," Ethan said once they were alone. "Accepting help isn't a weakness." "It is when the help comes with strings attached," Willow replied. "I know men like you, Mr. Young. Nothing comes for free." Something hardened in his expression. "You think you know me based on town gossip. Let me be clear, I'm offering help because it's the right thing to do, not because I expect anything in return." Willow felt a flicker of shame at her assumption. "I apologize. That was unfair." "Yes, it was," he agreed, but his expression softened. "Now, will you accept my help, or do I need to watch you hammer your thumb for the next 4 hours? A reluctant smile tugged at her lips. "I have never hammered my thumb." "There's a first time for everything," he countered with a grin. That day marked the beginning of a tentative friendship between Willow and Ethan. True to his word, he sent 2 ranch hands to help repair her fence without any mention of compensation or land acquisition. When the work was done, he invited her to dinner again, an invitation she surprised herself by accepting. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed frequently. Ethan seemed to find reasons to ride by her property, offering advice on her small herd or bringing books he thought she might enjoy. Willow found herself looking forward to these visits, though she was careful to maintain her independence. June brought scorching heat and the annual town festival. Willow, who had avoided social gatherings since her father's death, was persuaded by Ethan to attend. She wore her mother's best dress, a simple blue gown that had been carefully preserved in a trunk since her passing 10 years earlier. "You look beautiful," Ethan said when he came to escort her, the sincerity in his eyes making her blush. The town square was transformed with lanterns and bunting. A band played lively tunes while couples danced and children ran between stalls selling everything from candy to handcrafted goods. "Miss Zimmerman," called Mrs. Peterson, the general store owner's wife. "We haven't seen you in an age, and with Mr. Young, no less." Her eyebrows raised suggestively. Willow felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Young has been a good neighbor," she replied neutrally. "Indeed," Mrs. Peterson said, looking between them with obvious interest. "Well, enjoy the festival." As they walked away, Willow noticed the curious glances from other townspeople. "I believe we've become the subject of speculation," she murmured. Ethan's hand briefly touched the small of her back, sending an unexpected shiver up her spine. "Let them talk. Would you care to dance?" Before she could answer, a commotion broke out near the saloon. A group of cowboys, clearly deep in their cups, were harassing a young woman who appeared to be traveling alone. Without hesitation, Ethan strode toward the confrontation, Willow close behind. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice carrying an authority that made the men turn. "None of your concern, Young," slurred the largest of the group, a man Willow recognized as one of the hands from the Carson Ranch. "Just having a friendly chat with the lady." The woman, who couldn't have been more than 20, looked relieved at their intervention. "I asked them to leave me alone," she said, her accent suggesting she was from back east. "And now they will," Ethan stated firmly, "or they'll answer to me." The cowboys exchanged glances, clearly weighing their chances against Ethan's reputation. After a tense moment, they backed down, muttering curses as they retreated into the saloon. "Thank you," the young woman said, smoothing her rumpled dress. "I'm a leaner, right? I arrived on the stage yesterday to take the teaching position." Willow introduced herself and Ethan, then insisted on introducing Alina to Sheriff Miller to report the incident. By the time they'd settled the matter, the dancing had begun in earnest, and Ethan once again extended his hand to Willow. "I'm afraid I'm not much of a dancer," she admitted as he led her to the makeshift dance floor. "Neither am I," Ethan confessed, placing one hand respectfully at her waist. "But I find I'm willing to risk making a fool of myself for the pleasure of your company." As they moved together to the music, Willow found herself relaxing into his embrace. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness she hadn't realized she'd been missing since her father died. "People are staring," she whispered, noticing the curious onlookers. "Let them," Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "I can't say I mind being seen with the most interesting woman in the county." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "You have a silver tongue, Mr. Young." "Only when I mean what I say," he countered. The music ended too soon, and Willow reluctantly stepped back from his embrace. They spent the remainder of the evening together, sampling treats from the various stalls and talking with neighbors who seemed increasingly intrigued by their companionship. As the festival wound down, Ethan insisted on seeing Willow safely home. The ride back to her ranch was quiet, both lost in thoughts about the evening. "Thank you," Willow said as they approached her modest house. "I enjoyed myself more than I expected to." Ethan dismounted and helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering on her waist slightly longer than necessary. "As did I," he said softly. In the silver moonlight, his face seemed different, more vulnerable than the confident businessman she'd come to know. Without thinking, Willow reached up to touch his cheek, surprised by the tenderness she felt toward this man who had begun as nothing more than a neighboring rancher. Ethan caught her hand in his, turning it to place a gentle kiss on her palm. The gesture, so unexpected and intimate, sent her heart racing. "Willow," he murmured, the first time he'd used her given name. "I find myself thinking about you far more than is proper." She should have stepped back, maintained the proper distance between them. Instead, she whispered, "I've had similar thoughts." His eyes darkened, and for a moment Willow thought he might kiss her. Instead, he released her hand and stepped back, ever the gentleman. "It's getting late. I should let you rest." Disappointment and relief mingled as she nodded. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Willow," he replied, mounting his horse. "I'll call on you tomorrow if that's agreeable." "It is," she said, watching as he rode away into the darkness. That night, Willow lay awake longer than usual, replaying the evening in her mind and wondering what was happening between them. Ethan Young was everything she had told herself. She didn't need a man with the power to disrupt the independent life she'd been building. Yet she couldn't deny the way her heart quickened when he was near. July brought relentless heat and drought to the region. Willow watched with growing concern as the creek that supplied water to her property began to shrink. Without rain soon, her cattle would suffer, and the small vegetable garden that supplemented her meals would wither. Ethan visited regularly, bringing books and conversation that provided welcome distraction from her worries. Their friendship had deepened, though both seemed hesitant to acknowledge the growing attraction between them. One particularly hot afternoon, Ethan arrived with news. "The railroad representatives are coming next month," he said as they sat on her porch, seeking relief from the sun. "They're finalizing the route for the spur line." Willow's interest piqued. A railroad connection would make transporting cattle to market far easier and more profitable. "Will it come near here?" Ethan hesitated. "That depends on which landowners agree to sell rights of way." He met her gaze directly. "They're interested in running the line through the northeastern corner of your property." "My property," Willow repeated, surprised. "That's where the best grazing land is." "I know," Ethan said. "They're offering good money for the rights, but it would mean losing about 15 acres to the tracks and station." Willow frowned. "I can't afford to lose that pasture. My herd is small enough as it is." "I thought you might say that," Ethan replied. "That's why I wanted to propose an alternative." Something in his tone made Willow wary. "What kind of alternative?" "A partnership," he said carefully. "The Double Y has more grazing land than I need. If we combined our operations, you could move your cattle to my southern pastures, which would free up your northeastern corner for the railroad." Willow stared at him. "A partnership," she repeated flatly, "between your ranch and mine." "It makes practical sense," Ethan continued, misreading her reaction. "You're struggling with the drought and the bank note your father left." "How do you know about that?" Willow interrupted, rising from her chair. Ethan had the decency to look uncomfortable. "People talk. I told you that." "So all this time the help with the fence, the visits, the festival, it was about getting my land." The hurt in her voice was unmistakable. "No," Ethan said firmly, standing to face her. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" Willow demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been biding your time, waiting for me to fail so you could swoop in and take what's mine." Anger flashed in Ethan's eyes. "Is that really what you think of me, after everything?" "I don't know what to think," Willow said, fighting back unexpected tears. I thought you were different." "I am trying to help you, Willow," Ethan insisted. "The railroad will bring prosperity to this region, but without it, small ranches like yours won't survive another 5 years." "My ranch is not your concern," she said coldly. "I think you should leave." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, hurt and frustration evident in his expression. "As you wish," he finally said, his voice tight. "But think about what I've said. This isn't just about business for me." After he left, Willow sank back onto the porch step, confusion and anger warring within her. Part of her knew Ethan's proposal made practical sense. Her ranch was struggling, and the railroad would indeed change everything. But the idea of giving up even part of what her father had built, of admitting she couldn't manage on her own, was too painful to contemplate. A week passed with no word from Ethan. Willow threw herself into ranch work, ignoring the emptiness she felt each time she glanced toward the Double Y property. Her pride wouldn't allow her to admit how much she missed his visits. Then came the lightning storm. After weeks of drought, the clouds that gathered one August evening promised much-needed rain. Instead, they brought dry lightning that ignited the parched grassland between Willow's property and the foothills. She smelled the smoke before she saw it, an acrid scent carried on the wind. Racing outside, Willow spotted the orange glow on the horizon, growing brighter by the minute. Wildfire. Panic seized her as she calculated its path. If the wind held, the fire would reach her property within hours. Her cattle, her home, everything she had would be destroyed. Without hesitation, Willow saddled her horse and rode toward the nearest neighbor, an elderly couple named the Hendersons. They would need warning and help evacuating if necessary. By the time she reached their cabin, the fire had grown visible, a wall of flame advancing through the dry grass. Mr. Henderson was already hitching his wagon. "We saw it," he called as Willow approached. "Sheriff sent a rider. Everyone's supposed to gather at the church in town." "What about the cattle?" Willow asked, thinking of her own small herd. "Nothing to be done, Mrs. Henderson said sadly as she loaded their meager possessions. "We can only save ourselves now." Refusing to accept that answer, Willow rode back to her ranch, formulating a desperate plan. If she could drive her cattle to the creek bed, They might survive. The water was low, but the rocky terrain would provide some protection from the flames. As she approached her property, Willow was stunned to see riders already there, moving among her cattle. For a moment, she feared rustlers taking advantage of the chaos. Then she recognized Ethan's tall figure directing the operation. "What are you doing?" she called as she rode up. Ethan turned, relief visible on his face. "There you are. I was worried when I didn't find you at the house." "I went to warn the Hendersons," she explained. "But my cattle, we're moving them to safety," Ethan interrupted. "My men are here to help. The fire's moving faster than expected." Indeed, the wall of flame was clearly visible now, perhaps 2 miles away and advancing. The wind carried embers ahead of the main fire, threatening to ignite spot fires closer to the ranch. "Where are you taking them?" Willow asked, watching as Ethan's men expertly guided her cattle into a rough herd. "The Double Y has a stone corral on the east side of the property. It's the safest place," Ethan explained. "We've already moved my herds there." Willow hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Tell me what you need me to do." Together they worked with Ethan's ranch hands to drive Willow's 32 cattle toward the Double Y. The animals were skittish, sensing the approaching danger, but the experienced cowboys kept them moving steadily. By the time they reached Ethan's property, the sky behind them glowed ominously orange. Sparks and embers drifted on the wind as they secured the cattle in the stone corral. "The house," Willow suddenly remembered. "My father's things, it's too dangerous," Ethan said, gripping her arm as she turned toward her horse. "The fire's too close." "I can't lose everything," Willow insisted, pulling away. "There are things there I can't replace." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I'm coming with you." They rode hard back toward Willow's property, the heat of the approaching fire growing intense. When they reached the small ranch house, they had precious little time. Willow rushed inside, gathering her father's Bible, her mother's wedding ring, and a small box of letters and photographs. "Willow," Ethan shouted from outside. "We need to go now." The roar of the fire was deafening as she emerged from the house, clutching her treasures. Ethan was already mounted, his horse dancing nervously beneath him. He extended his hand, pulling Willow up behind him on the saddle. "What about my horse?" she asked, seeing the animal straining at its tether. "No time," Ethan said grimly, slapping the rope loose so the horse could flee. "Hold on." They galloped away from the ranch house just as the first flames caught the edge of the property. Willow looked back once to see fire engulfing the barn. Tears streamed down her face, but the wind whipped them away as Ethan pushed his horse to its limits. The journey back to the Double Y seemed endless, but finally they crested a hill that gave them view of the stone ranch house. Ethan's property had been spared the worst of the fire, protected by a wide creek and strategic fire breaks his men had established. Inside the house, Mrs. Holloway fussed over them, insisting Willow change out of her smoke-filled clothes and eat something. But food was the last thing on her mind as she stood at the window, watching the distant glow of the fire that was consuming everything she had worked for. Ethan found her there an hour later, still staring into the darkness. "The wind shifted," he said quietly. "The fire's moving north now, away from both our properties." "It doesn't matter," Willow replied, her voice hollow. "My house, the barn, the fences, it's all gone." "Not everything," Ethan countered. "Your cattle are safe, and the land itself will recover." "And in the meantime," she asked bitterly, "I have nothing, no home, no income." Ethan stepped closer, his hand tentatively touching her shoulder. "You have me," he said softly, "if you want me." Willow turned to face him, searching his expression. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when I offered a partnership, it wasn't just about the land or the railroad," Ethan admitted. "It was about finding a way to keep you in my life. I handled it poorly, and I'm sorry for that." He took a deep breath before continuing. "The truth is, Willow Zimmerman, I've fallen in love with you. Your determination, your spirit, your stubborn refusal to give up even when the odds are against you. I admire everything about you, and the thought of you riding back toward that fire tonight terrified me more than anything I've faced since the war." Willow stared at him, shocked by his candor. "You love me." "Yes," he said simply, "and if you'll let me, I want to help you rebuild. Not because I think you can't do it alone, but because I don't want you to have to." Tears welled in Willow's eyes, but these were different from the ones she'd shed watching her ranch burn. "I was so angry with you," she whispered. "I thought you were just trying to take my land." "Never," Ethan vowed. "Everything I have is yours if you want it, but all I really want is you, stubborn as you are." A smile broke through her tears. "Stubborn enough to scare the wind, as I recall you saying. And brave enough to face down a wildfire," he added, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face. In that moment, with the smell of smoke still clinging to their clothes and the future uncertain, Willow made her decision. Rising on her tiptoes, she pressed her lips to his in a kiss that spoke of new beginnings rather than endings. When they finally parted, Ethan's eyes shone with emotion. "Is that a yes?" "Yes to rebuilding," Willow clarified, though her smile softened the words. "The rest, I think we have time to figure that out." And they did. Over the following months, as autumn turned to winter, Ethan and his men helped Willow rebuild her ranch house, stronger and more comfortable than before. The wildfire, devastating as it was, had cleared decades of underbrush, and the spring brought new grass more lush than anyone could remember. The railroad came as predicted, bringing prosperity to the region. Willow, with Ethan's encouragement, negotiated terms that preserved the best of her land while still allowing for progress. Their partnership, both professional and personal, flourished in ways neither could have predicted that stormy night when she had stubbornly tried to fix a fence alone. On a clear April day in 1879, beneath an arch of early wildflowers, Willow Zimmerman became Willow Young in a ceremony attended by the entire community. Sheriff Miller officiated, Mrs. Holloway wept openly, and Alina Wright, now the established schoolteacher, caught the bridal bouquet. "Remember when we met?" Ethan asked as they danced at their wedding celebration. "You were hammering at that fence post in the pouring rain, and you said I was stubborn enough to scare the wind," Willow recalled with a laugh. "I stand by that assessment," he replied, pulling her closer. "But now, I know it's just one of the many reasons I love you." As they moved together under the stars, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had lost much in the past year: her father, her original home, the independence she had so fiercely protected. But she had gained something far more precious: a partner who valued her strength rather than seeing it as a challenge to overcome. The Double Z Ranch, as they now called their combined property, stretched before them, a legacy they would build together. And as Ethan kissed her beneath the Montana sky, Willow knew with certainty that some storms bring not just destruction, but the promise of new growth if one is stubborn enough to weather them.